I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 9. Lieutenant Takes Charge. 14th of September, 1990. As Sultan Qaboos Port, Muscat, Oman. Second Lieutenant Ainsley Fitzgerald was about as new to the Army as one could be. 6 months ago, she had been standing with her beaming parents at graduation from the University of South Florida in Tampa, with her diploma in hand, and her Army ROTC commissioning only moments away. The following week, it was off to the basic officer course at Fort Lee, Virginia, for supply officers. She had gone through the course with ease, especially the physical fitness portion. She'd played goalie on the local ice hockey team and could take the blows as well as give them. None of her classmates had wanted her for a sparring partner in the hand-to-hand combatives. Some of the male students had thought she would be easy. They'd all found out the hard way. Standing only 5'3" and weighing 100 pounds, she'd whooped their butts each time. But they'd all loved her for her looks and her intelligence. Her chain of command had soon realized that with her looks, her brains, and her personality, this young lady had a bright future ahead of her in the service. She had only joined her unit the week before, and was now standing in an empty warehouse in As Sultan Qaboos Port, Muscat, Oman. The warehouse sat between the first two piers in the harbor. Both piers were capable of handling bulk and container cargo, and a bulk carrier was just pulling into port. This ship had containers. The container yard was adjacent to the warehouse, and it was presently empty. "Lieutenant, don't just stand there. We have work to do getting this place organized and set to start receiving stuff. That ship will be secured in about an hour, and it'll be brought directly here. How do you want to lay this place out?" the platoon sergeant asked in a less than respectful tone. Fitzgerald just stared at him for a minute, but he could see it wasn't a deer-in-the-headlights stare. "Oh no, I screwed up with this one," went through his mind. "Sergeant," she finally said, "we haven't really had an opportunity to work together yet, have we?" Before he could answer, she continued, "No, we haven't. So let's get one thing straight. I do the thinking and directing and you get the job done. Right now I'm thinking. Do you know what I'm thinking about?" Again, before he could answer, she continued, "I'm thinking, what the hell is on that ship that we have to store? We aren't going to be emptying those containers. No one has given us a manifest yet. So until they do, how do we know what we're storing, what's shipping out in the container, where it's going, and whether there are any special considerations for storage? Until we get that information, how do you propose we lay out this warehouse or the container yard?" she asked. He didn't respond. "Cat got your tongue, Sergeant Murray?" "No, ma'am. I see your point," Murray hesitantly responded. "Good. Now you get the platoon together and get the forklifts in working order, while I go find someone that can get me the manifests, so we know what we're going to be putting in here. When I get back with that information, be ready to get this place organized. Oh, also see if you can get some spray paint," she directed, and then turned on her heel to get a move on. "Spray paint, ma'am?" "Yes, ma'am," was all he could say as she walked out the warehouse doors towards the dockyard. An hour later, she came back with a clipboard and papers. Following her was another sergeant. She made the introductions. "Sergeant Major, this is my platoon sergeant, Sergeant Murray," she said. Murray didn't say anything, but the two non-commissioned officers exchanged handshakes. "The sergeant major is in charge of the stevedores from the 7th Trans. They're working with the locals in unloading the ship. Most of the containers are bound for the 24th ID and consist of God only knows what. So we're going to rack and stack them in the yard until transports arrive to haul them to the 24th's cantonment area. As each container is placed in the yard, I want you to note it on the manifest and then mark on the doors with spray paint which unit it's assigned to. That way it'll be easy for the unit to identify specific containers and easier for us to pull a specific unit's containers if they need it. Any questions, Sergeant Murray?" "No, ma'am," he replied, as a smile crept across his face. The thought of being stuck with a green butter bar of a lieutenant faded as he realized she might actually know what she was doing. "Good. I'm going to go find out when those trucks are going to roll in here and start getting these containers out of my yard," she said, turning on her heel and walking off. "Sergeant Murray, it looks like you have a thinking lieutenant there. That could be dangerous," the sergeant major said with a grin. "Sir, I was told that all my problems could be solved by coming to see you," Lieutenant Fitzgerald said. She was addressing a 2-star general in an open bay office area with about 20 other officers behind their desks, which were arrayed around the general's desk in the middle. She had originally started at some distant office in the dock area and hadn't liked the answers she'd gotten, so she'd had gone to the next higher level until 2 hours later she was standing before this general. "And who told you that, Lieutenant?" General Sullivan asked, a wry grin forming on his face. He liked an officer that showed initiative. "It was that colonel sitting over there, sir," Fitzgerald said, pointing to an overweight colonel who was trying not to look in her direction. He hadn't thought she would really go speak to the general after he hadn't given her the answer she'd wanted. Looking at the colonel with a glare that said, "We'll talk later," General Sullivan motioned for her to sit down. "Okay, what's the problem that only I can solve?" he asked. "Sir, I'm in charge of the container yard at Sultan Qaboos Port. Our first ship came in about 3 hours ago and began offloading. I've been asking when I can expect to have trucks arrive to start moving those containers as I have another ship due in tonight and another tomorrow. That yard isn't that big. No one seems to be able to answer my question about the trucks to move stuff, which means my yard is going to pile up to the point that I won't be able to offload any more ships. That means the ships will get stuck in port, and future ones won't be able to dock and so on," she said, respectfully stating her case. General Sullivan stared at her for a moment, a smile spreading across his face. This was the kind of officer you latched onto, groomed and mentored for higher ranks. "Why isn't your company commander or battalion commander in here getting the answers for you?" Sullivan asked. "Sir, it's my yard. It's my problem to fix," was her simple response. Picking up the phone, Sullivan said, "Get me the contracting office." He waited. "Contracting, General Sullivan here. What's the status of the contracts for the trucks to haul containers?" He paused. "Well, if you don't know, get me someone who does know, and pronto." He paused again. "Yes, I'll hold." He covered the receiver with his hand and looked at Ashley. "We should have an answer shortly." "Yes, I'm still waiting." He shook his head. "Chambers, hello. What's the status of the contracts for the trucks to haul the containers out of the port's container yard? Next week? Shit, the containers are arriving today. Not a priority, my ass. Make it a priority. I want those trucks at the port tomorrow hauling that stuff out of there. They're to report to Lieutenant Ainsley Fitzgerald when they get there and no one else," General Sullivan said rather forcefully. Whoever Chambers was, he must have said the wrong thing. "Chambers, if those trucks aren't there in the morning, you'll be on a flight back to the States tomorrow night with your request for retirement in hand. And if they're not there by 0900, Lieutenant Fitzgerald is going to call me personally. Do I make myself clear? I don't care if they're gouging us on the price. Get the damn contract signed, and today. Do you read me?" Sullivan laid the receiver in the cradle and picked up a pen and a piece of paper. "Lieutenant, you call me at 0900 tomorrow and let me know the status of the trucks," he said, handing her his phone number. "Now, is there anything else?" Standing, Fitzgerald came to attention and saluted. "No, sir. You've been the savior of all my problems today. Thank you, sir." She turned and walked out. Everyone watched her leave the building, in a bit of awe at the bravado on her. Chapter 10. Planning Guidance. 15th of September 1990. CENTCOM forward. HQ, Military Technological College, Muscat, Oman. The building that had been given to the U.S. to act as their main headquarters was beautiful. After some hemming and hawing back and forth with the government of Oman and the group in charge of providing security, the Military Technological College had been officially designated as the new U.S. Central Command Forward Headquarters and Joint Allied Headquarters for this war in the Middle East. This crisis in the desert would now be managed at the military college. The facility was perfect for such an effort. Aside from having multiple large buildings that could house everyone, it had a solid perimeter and limited access to and from the compound. It also had a lot of empty land surrounding it, thus allowing them to establish a host of tents to house personnel and room to both establish a localized quick reaction force and host several air defense units. The compound also provided them quick access to the international airport and was close enough to meet with the king and other members of the royal family. It was about as ideal a location as they could have come up with. General Storeman Norman Schwarzkopf had finally arrived in country on 1st September. After making the perfunctory stops and visits with the local dignitaries and members of the royal family, to include the exiled emirs and royals, it was time to get down to the business at hand, the business of waging war and winning the peace. As he walked into the main auditorium, which was going to function as the primary briefing room, a junior officer, who happened to be a colonel, called out in a booming voice, "Attention!" As everyone jumped to their feet, Storeman Norman called out, "At ease, gentlemen, and take your seats." He walked down to the seat at the head of the bottom of the auditorium and looked up at the stage where a briefer stood, ready to begin his presentation once he gave him the nod. Turning around so he could see everyone, Schwarzkopf noticed how the rows of chairs and the desks sitting in front of those rows had been labeled by Directorate, Service Branch, and/or Allied Branch. This allowed him and anyone else to quickly see who they were talking to and be able to direct their immediate questions to them. Once everyone was settled, he began, "Now that we have our headquarters established, and more importantly, the Army is officially en route to our positions, it's time to issue you smart guys some planning guidance. This war kind of caught everyone by surprise. It took off really fast, and it's been running at full speed ever since. We've also been thrown a huge curveball with the Soviets seemingly getting involved at every level. In many ways, this conflict appears to have been engineered by them almost as a way of forestalling their impending collapse. However, I'm confident in our defensive plans at this point. You all have done an outstanding job in preventing the Iraqis from seizing all of Saudi Arabia and pushing into Oman. No easy feat. But what we have to do next, well, that's the hard part. What I haven't seen from you guys yet is our offensive plan to throw the Iraqis back across their own border." Many of the officers nodded in agreement. They knew it had been a mad dash to stop the Iraqis from taking over the Middle East. Now it was time to figure out how they were going to get them to give up and go home. Schwarzkopf continued, "I want you to start putting an offensive plan together immediately. As I see it, there are 3 options. 1, a penetration at some point with all our combat power focused on one point, enough to break through into the enemy's rear. To do that, we have to generate the power to overcome the frontline force and hold the shoulders. Second option is an envelopment of their forces to get into their rear area. But to do that, we have to fix his front line to prevent them from turning on us. The third option, as I see it, is a frontal attack. Put pressure on the entire front, find a weak spot, and punch through." He paused, looking to see who the note-takers were among his staff, and give them a chance to also catch up. Continuing, Schwarzkopf said, "Now, before we can do any of those options, we first need all of our forces in country and acclimated. Second, we need our logistics in place to support the operation through the duration and beyond. Third, we need air superiority. Fourth, we need a good reconnaissance of the Iraqi positions, minefields, obstacles, things like that. Fifth, we need to fix his secondary forces in place so they can't counterattack our lead elements. Sixth, this needs to be a phased ground operation with the liberation of the UAE first, the liberation of Saudi second, then the liberation of Kuwait, and finally the attack on Baghdad. Lastly, I want to minimize collateral damage to the civilian population. I do not want to win the war and lose the peace because we bombed the hell out of them indiscriminately. Understood? Sir, question, General Schless asked. What is it? Sir, what is our final strategic objective? We need to know that, so we have some idea of our force and logistical requirements. Now, General, that is a very good question. And when I get that question answered by the bureaucrats in Washington, then I will be sure to let you know, Schwarzkopf said with frustration. I'm sorry, Jim. I've been asking that question since the day we arrived here, and all I'm getting is hand-wringing and wait one for answers. I've suggested several options to them, such as the high ridge overlooking Kuwait City and even Baghdad. Thus far, all my suggestions have fallen into the cone of silence. So, for right now, let's say it's Baghdad and plan accordingly. We can modify that later if we get a decision out of Washington. Sitting in the room were 6 officers that were attending the School of Advanced Military Studies, or SAMS for short, at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. These were some smart majors that had completed the 1-year course and been held over for a 2nd year for advanced studies in the operational level of war. The operational level of war focused on the movement and employment of divisions and corps and army groups in the offense and defense. The instructors at the Army Command and General Staff College understood the operational level of war versus the tactical level better than anyone. The SAMS program was now teaching a selected number of officers in more detail than what they received attending the regular 1-year course. When the call had gone to deploy CENTCOM, a decision had been made to get some of these smart majors to come along and join the planning cell to gain some real-world experience in a major war. Looking at the small group of Jedi majors, as they were referred to, Schwarzkopf said, I want you 6 to put together a plan for us to go on the offense with the current force we have. I want to see a concept for the ground plan based on the 3 options I just covered and your recommendation for the best option, and you only have the forces currently in country or en route. If you can't do it with the current forces, I want your recommendation on what else we need. Any questions? Schwarzkopf asked. The 6 majors looked at each other to see who would speak up. Finally, Schless, who they would be working for, answered, No, sir, we got it. Good. I'll expect a brief in 5 days. After Schwarzkopf left the room, General Schless and the 6 majors sat for a few minutes in silence, each lost in his own thoughts. Finally, one spoke up. Sir, he is kidding, right? About putting an offensive plan together with the current force structure? Major Rumgay asked. Major, General Schwarzkopf does not kid around, Schless replied calmly. I know, sir. I worked for him once before when he was a brigade commander, Rumgay said. He's tougher than a woodpecker's lips. A few of the majors chuckled at the simile. Getting down to brass tacks, General Schless explained, All right, for planning purposes, let's look at the following to work with. We have the 82nd and 101st on the ground in the west. They're backed up with the 8th, 10th, and 45th Saudi brigades. We have the 24th with the 197th Brigade here in Oman. The 1st Cav and the 3rd Armored Cav Regiment are offloading as we speak. We have the 1st Marine Division ashore and the 2nd Marine Division afloat. The British 1st Armored Division is available, and we've been told we may get 2 Egyptian divisions, but you can't count on them yet. The Saudis have created a task force that's under the command of General Khalid bin Sultan and consists of 2 Saudi mechanized brigades, an Omani brigade, a UAE mech battalion, a Kuwaiti brigade with an additional mechanized brigade, a brigade of the Saudi National Guard, and a battalion of Saudi Marines. The majors were writing this down and making sure they understood the basics of what they had to work with. One of the majors, Major Stuba, joked, "If that ain't a mixed bag of worms, I don't know what is." Stuba was an infantry officer and had been a scout platoon leader in Vietnam. In his younger days, he had been a college football player at St. John's University when it had won the small school national championship. He still wore his championship ring. "Agreed, but we play the hand we're dealt." "Next question," Schless countered. "So, sir, if I understand this right, what we have is two light divisions, the 82nd and the 101st, located several hundreds of miles away from us with little chance of link-up or the capability of supporting an attack by our heavy forces. We have 7 heavy divisions and an armored cavalry regiment for conducting an offensive operation against 6 heavy divisions in the 1st defensive belt, and 3 heavy divisions and 3 light divisions in the 2nd belt, with 8 more divisions sitting around Riyadh and a few more divisions in a 3rd belt before Kuwait. And that's not counting their reserve corps in Iraq. Is that about right, sir?" Major Peters expounded to everyone. "That's about right, Major," General Schless replied as he nodded his head in approval. "Sir, an offensive operation can't be done and reach the strategic objective that General Schwarzkopf outlined with the current force structure we have," Major Stuba finally proclaimed. "Well, that's your initial opinion, but let's do this. Look at how you can employ our naval and air assets to aid our offensive punch, and see if that might succeed in changing the outcome and pushing us closer to our victory. Remember, if you can't meet the entire objective, outline what you can meet and what more you'd need to finish it. After that, we'll see what additional forces we'll need to reach our strategic goals. With that, I'm off to meet some folks for dinner near the coast, so you all have fun. Give me a shout when you're ready to brief your plan to me," General Schless said to the chagrin of his Jedis, and left the room. Needless to say, the Jedi majors would be burning some midnight oil working up a plan. As the night progressed into the next day, the 6 Jedi majors were looking for every possible planning consideration they could find. Items like the terrain and environment had to be examined and understood. The enemy disposition and force structure were examined in detail from intelligence reports and satellite photos. Enemy tactics were following Soviet doctrine, which these guys were well versed in, so that was the easiest piece of the puzzle. One of the more trying pieces was the capabilities of the Egyptian and Saudi forces. How did these guys operate? What capabilities did they bring? 1,000 questions had to be asked and answered. "What time is it?" asked Major Rumgay. "It's 2:30 hours," answered Jack Stuba. "Guys, let's call it a night and come back at, say, 0900. I think we'll all be better off with some sleep instead of staring at notes and blank paper," Bob Peters suggested. No one objected, and the group turned out the lights and headed to bed. A loud pounding on the door woke Rumgay and Stuba, who were sharing a room. "Rise and shine, ladies," Bob Peters said, as he opened the door with a pot of coffee and 2 cups. "What time is it?" Stuba grumbled. "It's 08:15, and you have 45 minutes to get ready and be in the shop. Me and McLean are heading over there now, and Fred and Mike will be over when they finish eating breakfast. See you over there," Peters said as he closed the door, leaving them with the fresh pot of coffee. "How can anyone be that chipper this early in the morning?" Stuba asked as he yawned. "I don't know, but if he's going to wake us each morning with a pot of coffee, let him stay chipper." At 0900, everyone was assembled, and they started their meeting. "Okay, I recommend we come up with 2 courses of action, like the general put in his guidance. Let's look at the option that's just what we have right now in country, and then look at a second plan if we could get some stuff that we don't have, and identify what those additional forces should be. Jim, Jack, and Mike want to tackle the second option, and me, Roy, and Fred will tackle the first?" Peters asked. "I'll also go find out some information on the Arab forces that we have, and get back to both teams." "Sure, sky's the limit on the second option, right?" Jim asked with a grin. "Think outside the box," was Peters's response as the teams separated to opposite sides of the conference room and started developing the courses of action. Ideas were placed on paper and then tossed out. Slowly, two options with a couple of courses of action each began to form. Late in the afternoon, they'd settled on 2 courses of action. When General Schless came back to check on them, they'd be ready to brief him. In the meantime, Major Stuba continued to look at one Iraqi fighter squadron in particular. It was being called 3rd Squadron. What everyone was struggling to figure out was what made this squadron so special. Something about them was uniquely different. The way they flew their aircraft, the way they engaged the Americans, the way they flew in formations, they just flew differently than the other Iraqi squadrons. They were proving to be incredibly deadly compared to the other Iraqi Air Force squadrons. 3 days later. "Good morning, sir," Major Stuba said, as General Schless came into the room. Major Stuba was acting as the group leader for the 6 Jedi Majors. Everyone was already standing behind their respective chairs, waiting to get started. General Schless moved to a chair in the front row of the briefing room, which was arranged like a small auditorium with 30 seats. Only 6 were presently occupied. "Okay, guys, let's get on with it. Show me what you managed to come up with," Schless said. "Yes, sir. As you know, this is our first go at this. We've developed 2 courses of action for each option that we'd like to brief this morning. In addition, we will discuss the force structure needed to accomplish the course of action that you choose in order to reach the strategic objective. I will just say right up front, sir, that with the current force structure, we cannot reach the strategic objective of capturing Baghdad. Furthermore, in both cases, we believe we can successfully seize only the first objective, recapturing the United Arab Emirates and thoroughly hammering the Iraqi forces from the air," Major Stuba stated, and then waited a minute for the general to provide a rebuttal. Stuba had half expected to receive a major ass-chewing and then a dressing down by the general. But when he didn't proceed to challenge their assessment, Stuba pressed on. "Sir, we'll discuss the assumptions we've made thus far. First, we will and must have air superiority in all courses of action for both options. Second, we must negate the Iraqi air defense systems. Third, we assume that the 82nd and the 101st can continue to hold the area around Jeddah and Yanbu, but cannot come to our assistance in the east. Their position will really be meant more for tying the enemy down. Fourth, logistical resupply from the outside will continue uninterrupted to include logistic units. Fifth, the British 1st Armored Division is of equal capability to the comparable U.S. units. Sixth, the forces of Saudi Arabia and others are probably inferior to the Republican Guard of Iraq, but equal to or superior to the Iraqi forces in general," Major Stuba explained. "All good assumptions, Major. We may have to add a couple more before this is over. Please continue," General Schless said. For the next couple of hours, the Jedi Majors went over everything they had come up with. Of the major challenges they had to figure out how to overcome, the logistics and air superiority over the battlefield were at the top of the list. The latter was still probably the most important factor and would likely tip the balance of the war in their favor. They went over in great detail the challenges faced in obtaining air supremacy over the Iraqis, namely the fact that the Iraqis had been outfitted with a lot of Tier 1 Soviet equipment both prior to the war, thus enabling the crews to be adequately trained on the equipment, and then apparently during the second week of the war, when more than a handful of Soviet freighters had already been in the area, waiting to offload their equipment refits in the newly captured ports. This caused the group to digress into an hour-long conversation to discuss this so-called Lend-Lease program the Soviets had signed with the Iraqis at the end of 1989 and going into the first half of 1990, all the way up to the start of the war. What the Soviets had essentially done for the Iraqis was a one-to-one swap of nearly all of their existing military equipment for frontline Tier 1 Soviet equipment. This had both cut the maintenance costs of several Soviet Army Corps and outfitted a battle-hardened military with the best Tier 1 equipment they could acquire just before the start of this war. Worse, there had been a real priority placed on the modernization of the Iraqi air defense systems and their air force. This meant when the war had started, their ground units had been able to advance with the best possible air defense vehicles to protect them as they'd raced across the desert. What still baffled the Jedi Majors was 3 specific Iraqi Air Force squadrons. The first was 3rd Squadron, which operated the vaunted MiG-29 Fulcrums. The second was 6th Squadron, which flew the MiG-25 Foxbats. And the third was 7th Squadron, which flew a mix of Su-25 and Su-24 attack aircraft. These particular squadrons had scored above-average sortie rates and kill or engagement rates. Several pilots in the 3rd and 6th Squadrons had already achieved Fighter Ace status. General Schless interrupted their conversation at this point to say, "This information you're asking about these Iraqi squadrons is very interesting. It's something that's been brought up at the highest levels as well. It's becoming quite the anomaly, and there are some suspicions, some outright accusations by some, that these squadrons are not being flown by Iraqis, but in fact straight up flown by Soviet pilots who are operating these aircraft to aid them." None of the majors said anything at first. Their faces all looked like they had just sucked on a lemon. This was a consideration they had thought about, but hadn't given a lot of credence until the general had mentioned it. "Sir, if these are actual Russian pilots flying these aircraft, that may account for why we've been unable to secure air supremacy. If the Iraqi Air Force is being reinforced with Soviet aircraft and pilots, essentially fighting the war for them as proxies or contractors, then this will seriously complicate our efforts at achieving air supremacy." Major Stuba commented softly, almost unsure of what he was saying. The general nodded slowly. "It does. This is a large political problem the folks back in Washington will have to sort out. For now, it's incumbent on us to devise the best possible strategy to defeat the enemy given the resources and capabilities we have at hand. With that knowledge once again moved to the forefront of our minds, let's get back to devising a strategy we can present to the boss, shall we?" Chapter 11. 1st Marine Division stands up. 17th of September, 1990. 1st Marine Division HQ, Masira Island, Oman. Masira Island lay 475 miles from Fujairah by sea. The island of rock and sand and very little vegetation was just 40 miles long at the longest point and about 10 miles wide at the widest point. A paved road circled the island along the coast, but only an occasional dirt road cut into the interior. There was nothing in the interior except rocky mountains, so no need to pave a road there. It did have a major airport capable of accommodating a squadron of marine fighters. It was in the process of being modified so it could handle a few more squadrons that'd start to show up in the coming weeks. For the time being, during the build-up, access to the island had been limited to residents with proof of residency. Several ferries came over daily from the mainland, bringing additional workers, cars, trucks, and supplies as needed. These ferries had the capability to ramp right on the beach, just as a military landing craft could do. The island also boasted a similar hydrography to the beaches in the vicinity of Fujairah, where it was rumored the Marines would come ashore. This made it an ideal place to practice their amphibious operations before having to do it for real. For the time being, the island was also becoming the temporary home of the 1st and 7th Marine Expeditionary Brigades, which would comprise the 1st Marine Division. "Sir, the final elements of the 1st MEB will be here tomorrow," Colonel Hochleiter, the G3 for the division, explained. "Good. I want to make sure we give our Marines time to adapt to this environment before we start some large-scale training. Right now, the units can focus on small unit tactics until everyone is acclimated. The Sultan has practically given us the entire island to train on, but we don't have permission to employ live fire as of yet. I think CENTCOM is working on that one. General Schwarzkopf's guidance is to have as little impact on the locals as possible. He doesn't want to win the battles but lose the peace. Be sure the commanders understand that, General Hopkins said. General Hopkins was the commander of the 1st Marine Division. He was hell-bent on making sure his Marines didn't stir the pot in the wrong direction. Marines had a reputation for being a rowdy bunch. Colonel Jasper, the division supply officer, pointed out, "Sir, as you're aware, we have very limited facilities. The 7th MEB has been here the longest and morale has been slipping. Our Marines literally have nowhere to go and nothing to do, stuck living in some austere environments all while being in a dry country. With the 1st MEB closing in, the warehouses that we're housing people in are totally inadequate for our needs. The sanitation is almost non-existent. They're overcrowded, and with the 120-degree heat, the guys are burning up in those places. In addition, with the troops in the warehouses, we have no place to store supplies as they're being delivered." Colonel Hochleiter nodded. The situation had been getting pretty bad, and was looking to get even worse in the coming weeks and months. "Sir, may I propose we start moving people out into the field? We have tentage now for the units, and the troops will be more comfortable out of the warehouses and in the field. They can sleep during the day and train at night when it's cooler. At least the breeze will help them cool down, which is not happening in the warehouses. The new arrivals can move into one warehouse for the first 24 hours before we notify their units and ship them out. The Maritime Pre-Positioning Squadron 2 has brought in enough vehicles that we can start resupplying units in the field, and the supply and service units are about up and running and ready to get to work. If you'd like, we can coordinate with the amphib fleet and start making arrangements for some training and developing a combat operation as well," Hochleiter offered. He was hoping the general would let them start to get some sort of training going. If nothing else, it'd help to keep the men busy for the time being. General Hopkins sighed as he listened to the report on his Marines. He was not happy about the morale issue. He knew that'd need to get sorted sooner rather than later. "Has CENTCOM given us any idea of what their plan for us is going to be?" Hochleiter smiled as he replied, "Sir, we have been notified to attend a meeting the day after tomorrow, along with Admiral Joy, at CENTCOM headquarters in Muscat. Admiral Joy will be flying in to pick us up so you and him will have a chance to go over some things prior to the meeting, and then on the way back. I'll be going with you, and he's bringing his ops guy as well. I suspect there'll be a logistics meeting shortly after this meeting. We'll probably be getting an idea of what we'll be doing after tomorrow. Okay, get a plan together to move the 7th MEB on the north side of the island and the 1st MEB on the south side. They can start small unit training until we get more of the vehicles ashore. What's our vehicle status at this time, Jasper?" Hopkins asked. "We currently have 31 M60A1 tanks, 2 M60A1 tank dozers, 20 M198 howitzers, 5 LVT-C7A1, and 62 LVT-P7A1 assault amphibious vehicles, 13 LAV-25s, 42 tow Humvees, and 33 weapon carrier Humvees. The problem we're having is that this was all planned to be offloaded in a prepared port, which we don't have here, so a lot has to be loaded and brought over the beach," Colonel Jasper explained. "Well, let's do the best we can. I suspect once we get it all ashore, we're going to have to develop some plans for combat loading it for the next phase." "Sir, we have a bigger problem right now," Colonel Jasper said. "Oh, do tell, Colonel." "Sir, we have a Class 1 and Class 3 problem. We can get hot A's, but we don't have the field kitchens ashore to cook the food yet, and I don't expect to see them for a couple of days. What fresh produce and meat we do have is going bad in this heat, as we don't have refrigeration for all this food," Jasper explained. "And the Class 3? General Hopkins remarked. "Sir, what fuel is coming to the island is coming by civilian barge, and they don't have the capability of supplying us with enough fuel for the vehicles we have ashore now. I would like to get the engineers going on building a POL farm over at the airfield, so we can get tanker aircraft in here to fill them and service both our aviation assets and the ground vehicles. The other problem is the Prepo vehicles are in need of lubricants and services, and we don't have enough lubricant to service all of the vehicles. In addition, we haven't been able to locate the containers that have the mechanics' tools and equipment needed to service all the vehicles." "Do we have any service support people, fuel handlers on the ground yet?" Hopkins inquired. He realized fast how quick this could screw things up for them. "Fuel handlers should be arriving sometime today if the flow sticks to the manifest and plan," Colonel Hochleiter interjected. "Good. As soon as they arrive, marry them up with the engineers and let's get that fuel farm built. I'll talk to Marcent about getting us some refrigerated vans for food storage. Sending in the shooters with no support is not the way to do business. There are some lessons to be learned here." Chapter 12. Transition. 17th of September, 1990. 3rd Squadron. Abu Dhabi International Airport, Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. Major Popkov was exhausted. Their squadron had just relocated from the western desert of Iraq to the Abu Dhabi airport. Their intelligence said the Americans had moved a substantial number of new squadrons to Oman and bombers out of Diego Garcia. It was obvious they were building up forces to make a major play on the Iraqi forces in the UAE. The powers that be wanted their top fighter squadrons moved into the area to blunt the Americans' latest efforts. Normally he'd be ticked off about being pulled away from a front he was responsible for so thoroughly dominating. Then he'd been told a new squadron of Russian volunteers had arrived in-country and would be taking their place. He liked that idea a lot more than some of these subpar Iraqi pilots. Some of the Iraqi pilots were actually pretty decent. They'd learned a lot from the Russians, but many of them needed more training time, and that wasn't going to happen with the war. Still, the near-constant missions and stress were starting to wear on him and his comrades. Once his squadron had relocated to their new home, they had been given 2 full days off. He and his pilots had spent most of their time at the beach, swimming in the water, and just forgetting about the war. They knew when they returned, they'd be thrown back into the grinder. Right now, his pilots were being housed in the most amazing hotel in the city. They'd each been given a penthouse-style room to bunk in, full room service, and just about everything they could want or need to unwind from the day's missions. The hotel, fortunately, wasn't located too far from the airport. With limited civilian traffic on the roads, nothing was really that far from the airport. When they either left the hotel or headed to the airport, they were driven in luxury sedans and given a military escort, not that they needed it. There hadn't been any civil protests or issues thus far. One of the key differences at the airport Popkov noticed immediately was the deployment of the Soviets' S-300 surface-to-air missile system. Near as he could tell, they had deployed close to a battalion's worth of the systems in and around the city and the airport. He was glad he didn't have to fly against them. The S-300 was a beast of a system. The Americans were in for a rude surprise when they finally got their act together and started going on the offensive. Walking into the squadron briefing room, Popkov noticed a lot more brass around than usual. For the last week, his squadron had largely been flying combat air patrols near the border and over any large troop movements. The Americans had for the most part kept their fighters on their side of the border, and the Iraqis had largely done the same. The southeastern front near Oman was, by all accounts, a quiet front compared to the active fighting taking place out west near the Red Sea. That front saw near-constant air battles raging between the two sides. Taking his seat near the front of the room, Major General Sokolov, flanked by an Iraqi Air Force general, finally got the meeting going. "Good morning, everyone. I wanted to meet with you personally to discuss with you the importance of the coming weeks and months. Later today, the Americans and their British lackeys are going to bypass the UN Security Council and push forward a referendum declaring the actions of the government of Iraq as illegal, claiming that the Iraqis have waged an illegal war against their peaceful neighbors. They are also pushing forward a second vote pending the first one passes to create a United Nations peacekeeping force, similar to what they did during the Korean Patriotic War, to form a military force to oust the Iraqis from their captured lands. Popkov didn't like where this was going. It likely meant the Americans were not going to be willing to negotiate a peace to end this war. More likely, they were going to form an alliance under the guise of the UN to oust them by force. The general continued. The Soviet Union, along with China, has vehemently opposed this move. We have even gotten the French to agree with us. However, the Americans are determined to assert their control over the oil nations of the Middle East and are pushing forward with their resolution. While Mother Russia cannot intervene directly in this conflict, the First Secretary is going to allow more Russian volunteers to come to the aid of our Iraqi allies. Over the coming weeks, these new volunteer units will begin to arrive in Baghdad, where they will form up and then be sent forward to the front lines. I hope they know what they're doing. This war could envelop the entire motherland if they are not careful, Popkov thought privately. What I need you all to do is work tirelessly to keep the American Air Force off the Iraqi forces' backs. It's important that they are able to build up the defenses needed to repel what we all know is coming, an American-led invasion. Continue to do what you do best, shoot down Yankee fighters. That is all. General Sokolov concluded, and then left their briefing room with the Iraqi general. Once everyone had left, Popkov stood and took his own place at the head of the room. Well, that was a complete waste of our time. It's not like they told us anything new. Of course we're going to kill Yankee fighters. We get paid a handsome bonus for each kill. This elicited a few hoots and hollers of excitement. They were getting rich off this assignment, that was for sure. Okay, here are the flight assignments and rosters for the next week. This is subject to change if we receive any new intelligence or there is a major American offensive. Continue to work together and look out for each other. Let's show these Yankees this squadron knows how to fight. Chapter 13. Option 2. 17 September 1990. CENTCOM Forward HQ, Military Technological College, Muscat, Oman. I trust everyone had a decent lunch, General Schless said, as he entered the conference room. The Jedi majors just smiled. Okay, let's get started. This is Option 2 and envelopment, correct? Schless asked. Yes, sir, Major Stuba said. First slide. And the first slide came up. Sir, as you can see, we have had to add a few more assumptions. One, that the U.S. Navy can dominate the Iraqi Navy in the Persian Gulf. The Iraqis have acquired some very fine coastal patrol boats with the latest in Soviet anti-ship missiles that'll need to be neutralized before any sort of amphibious assault takes place. It also appears that the Soviets sold the Iranians at least one Kilo-class submarine. That submarine was able to sink 2 supply ships. It also needs to be hunted down and sunk. 2, we have to have the strait cleared of any minefields. 3, we need intelligence on the hydrography of the shores around the UAE, on both the Gulf side and the Arabian Sea side. And 4, we're assuming that the Gator Navy can support an amphibious assault, Major Stuba indicated. So I take it you're looking at an amphibious assault along the coast somewhere, Schless said, nodding his head in approval. Yes, sir, Major Stuba answered confidently. Please continue, Schless directed. Next slide. As the slide came up, it showed a large map of the battle space. The slide also denoted the various friendly and enemy units. The subsequent slides would outline the course of action for each unit and task force. Sir, the course of action we're recommending is as follows. We recommend our naval amphibious ships move through the strait and come to an embarkation station between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. This move has been designed to be a feint, a false attack. Our hope is to fix forces in that area, primarily the 1st Hammurabi Division and 2nd Al-Medina Division, with the threat of an amphibious assault, so they won't be able to redeploy to stop our primary assault. The real amphibious assault will take place shortly after sunset, when JTF East will attack with the 1st Marine Division, conducting an amphibious assault in the vicinity of Fujairah, and continue to attack along E-84 towards Sharjah. This combined land and amphibious assault will be joined by the 2nd Marine Division, who will attack along Route 5 from Al-Wajaja to Dubai International Airport. As Stuba talked, more slides with maps showing the exact movements appeared. It painted a much bigger picture of how each attack would unfold and how each attack supported the next attack, and so on. As the Marines and JTF East move, Task Force Sayal, this is a combined force of what's left of the Kuwaiti, Bahrain, and UAE forces, along with the Omanis, will fix the 3rd Tawakkalna Division in Al Ain. Then one division will attack on right flank south of Al Ain and seize the objectives in the vicinity of Abu Dhabi, with a division in the center and the last division on left flank. We'd then have the 3rd ACR screen forward of the left flank division to Al Mirfa. Major Stuba paused for just a moment as he looked at the map and the units he'd just been pointing to and their paths of attack before looking confidently at General Schless, concluding, "This constitutes the main attack to remove the Iraqis from the Gulf states prior to lunging into Saudi Arabia." General Schless studied the maps and the proposals silently for a moment. Then he said, "We're putting a lot of faith in the Navy's minesweepers getting here soon. Honestly, the Brits have the better minesweeper fleet. Maybe the Navy can get them on board right away to help with this. Good brief, everyone. What else you got?" Major Stuba smiled. "Now for our next course of action." He brought up the next slide. A second course of action appeared with the map outlining the situation much like the first. "Sir, this is a single envelopment with Joint Task Force East attacking with 3 divisions abreast, followed by the 2 Marine divisions, all driving on Abu Dhabi and continuing to Dubai. Task Force Sa'al will hold elements of the 3rd Tawakkalna Division in Al Ain, with the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, screening the left flank for a possible counterattack from the 6th Nebuchadnezzar Division," Major Stuba stated. "It's a bit more simplistic in its design, but it's also the brute force method of the 2 courses of action we've developed." "I agree. This course of action appears to be a penetration move more than an envelopment. You left the amphibious assault option out," General Schless commented. The general looked like he was thinking pretty hard about the plan before he added, "Tell you what, put an amphibious assault in this course of action with 1 Marine Division making the assault between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. The 2nd Marine Division will follow the division on the right flank. This will be the course of action we'll present to the general. It's straightforward, with a bit less in the way of moving parts to it, so even the crayon eaters can't screw it up." His last comment elicited a few chuckles from the Army officers. "Write it up and get the Air Force and Navy on board. This won't get us to Kuwait, but it'll at least free up the UAE and give us a lot better logistical network to leverage for the follow-on campaigns. I also want to hear from the logisticians and know that they can support the 2 courses of action and for how long. Let me know when you're ready to brief General Schwarzkopf and the staff. Any questions?" General Schless asked as he stood to leave. Major Stuba looked to the rest of his team to make sure they didn't have questions, before he confidently replied, "No questions, sir." CENTCOM Forward HQ, Military Technological College, Muscat, Oman. "Well, what did the Jedis come up with?" General Schwarzkopf asked General Schless, as the man walked into his office an hour after he'd met with them. General Schless smiled at the bluntness of Schwarzkopf. It made him relatively easy to work with. He took a seat as he explained. "With what they have to work with, they gave us 2 viable plans. I personally like the double envelopment or brute force plan the best. It could work, but it'll work only in liberating the UAE. It's going to take everything we have just to do that. Once we've managed to bring substantially more forces from the US, we'll have the combat power needed to finish the job. But this'll get us going and moved in the right direction." "Good. Honestly, I don't know if we will go into Iraq, although that makes sense. My orders right now are to kick them out of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, Schwarzkopf replied, easing into an overstuffed chair and indicating for Schless to do the same. These chairs were much more comfortable than the ones next to his desk. Before you sit, pour us a drink. The bottle is on the sideboard over there, General Schwarzkopf indicated, with a wave of his hand. General Schless fixed 2 drinks, Cokes, handing one to Schwarzkopf. Oman was a bit more liberal about the consumption of alcohol than Saudi Arabia, and being inside a U.S. compound, they really didn't care. However, one of the first orders that was put out to all U.S. forces was that no alcohol would be consumed while in the CENTCOM AOR. You say the Jedi Majors have a good plan, Schwarzkopf said in a matter-of-fact manner as he took a sip. I said they have a plan that's the best we can expect with the forces we have. It includes a penetration that drives north and an amphibious assault that drives south, but depends on the Navy clearing the minefields and opening the strait, and having a sufficient number of ships. Schless countered. That'll piss off the Iranians, Schwarzkopf mumbled. After their sub just sank 2 of our supply ships, we should initiate Praying Mantis 2 and wipe out their entire navy, Schless declared angrily. He sighed before adding, if we keep the mine clearing to the southern side of the strait, they can't bitch too much, especially if we don't cross into their waters, Schless explained. You know those ragheads consider the entire strait their domain, and there still isn't any definitive proof that it was an Iranian sub that sank those supply ships, and not an Iraqi one, Stormin Norman countered. No one spoke for a moment. Then Schless pontificated. I wonder if they consider it their domain enough to get into a shooting match with us. That would bring a lot more nations into this fight. Oh, speaking of more nations, I got word today that Canada and Australia are going to be sending naval ships and fighter aircraft to join us. The Canadians are sending 2 frigates and a resupply ship, and an air task force of CF-18 aircraft, and the 1st Canadian Field Hospital. I thought we would have them support 1st UK Armour. Good idea. Keep the Queen's Own together. The Australians are sending 2 frigates and a resupply ship as well as an EOD dive team and a task group medical support element. I'd recommend putting the medics aboard the Comfort, General Schless explained. What about ground forces? Are they sending any? Schwarzkopf inquired. A contingent of the Australian 16th Air Defence Regiment will be aboard the resupply ship, as she has no air defence weapons. But that's about it, Schless stated, sipping his drink. Everyone wants Saddam out of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, but no one wants to get their hands dirty. Fucking allies, Schless thought privately.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.